Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. Today I've got an amazing story for you. Clara Lorn knew the second her father closed the door that something was being traded, and it was her. The air inside their wooden cabin hung heavy, not with smoke or heat, but with a silence that screamed louder than any argument. Outside, the sun sank low over the Dakota Plains, staining the land in gold like it was trying to hide the dirt beneath. Her father stood by the window, hands shaking as he wiped the sweat from his neck. He didn't look at her when he said it. "You're to marry Jeb Caro." The words hit harder than a slap. Clara's breath caught. She didn't ask why. She already knew. He had lost everything again. The horse, the harvest money, the gun. This time the cost was his daughter. Jeb Caro was a known bandit, a man who rode with wolves and spoke with fists. He had a face carved from cruelty and a reputation that kept decent people from crossing the prairie. Clara had seen him once in town. He smiled like a snake. Now she was to be his tonight. Her mother sobbed softly in the corner, helpless as the sun bleeding away outside. Clara didn't cry. She stood legs steady, spine straight. Even as fear clawed at her ribs, she wouldn't beg, wouldn't plead, but she would remember. Every detail, every face, every promise broken. When the hoofbeats came at sunset, thunder rolling over brittle earth, she didn't run. She stepped outside, the wind catching her hair like a final goodbye. Jeb dismounted with a leer, tossed a sack of silver coins at her father's feet like she was a sack of wheat, then grabbed her wrist. "Pretty thing," he said. "You'll learn your place quick." Clara didn't flinch. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was steel. That night, she lay beside a fire in a camp that stank of blood and whiskey, staring at the stars as if they might break formation and come rescue her. And from far beyond the hills, deep in the Lakota lands, she thought she heard a howl. Something fierce, something free. She didn't know his name yet. But he was out there watching, waiting. And one day soon, he would come for her. The days that followed blurred into dust, smoke, and commands barked like insults. Jeb Caro didn't want a wife. He wanted a trophy, a possession, something to show off to the rest of his gang, like a stolen horse or a shiny pistol. Clara rode behind him, hands bound to the saddle, lips chapped from wind, and skin raw from sun. The 5 men who rode with him laughed often, drank hard, and stared at her like wolves circling a wounded deer. She didn't speak, not once. Not when they set camp in dry riverbeds. Not when Jeb slapped her for looking away. Not when he pressed a knife to her chin and said, "You're mine now." Her silence wasn't fear. It was fire deep and low, waiting. She listened. She memorized faces, weapons, patterns. She waited. Every night she stared at the sky, wondering how long it would take for the land to answer her. And one night, it did. As they traveled farther west into Lakota territory, Jeb grew more paranoid. He shouted more, slept with his rifle. "Savages," he muttered, "will ride fast through this stretch." But the earth beneath them had already shifted. That morning Clara saw it. A mark carved into a tree. Not random, deliberate, a sign. She didn't know what it meant, but Jeb did. He went pale. That night they camped with no fire. He told his men to sleep in shifts. She saw fear in his eyes for the first time. It tasted better than water. She slept lightly, hand near the blade she had hidden in her boot the day they left. She hadn't used it yet, but she would. The wind picked up near midnight, curling ash into the sky. She woke to silence, unnatural, heavy, expectant. Then a sound like thunder, fast, rhythmic, surrounding them. Horses, dozens. She sat up as shadows moved through the trees. One of the men screamed, cut off mid-breath. Jeb grabbed his rifle, cursing, eyes wide. And then he was gone, dragged from the edge of the camp like a rag doll into the dark. Clara didn't scream. She stood waiting, and from the shadows stepped a man with war paint like lightning across his face, eyes sharp as a hawk. He looked at her. Really looked. "You don't belong with them," he said. It was not a question. It was a beginning. The man didn't speak again. He only gestured. Quick, firm, precise. And within seconds, 2 more warriors emerged from the brush, like shadows given shape. They moved through the camp with the silence of hunters, gathering weapons, scattering the bodies of the bandits like leaves. Clara didn't know if they were dead or simply gone, and she didn't care. Jeb was nowhere in sight. The man with the lightning paint stood before her, watching her like he was measuring not just her face, but her spirit. When she made no move to run, he nodded once. "Come," he said. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't soft, but something in his voice made her feet obey. She followed barefoot and stunned, her hands trembling though her heart beat steady. The night swallowed them quickly, the trees rising like walls. The bandits' camp faded behind them, and with it, the last scraps of who she had been. They moved quickly but not roughly. She was not dragged. She was not shoved. Still, her mind reeled. Was she a prisoner now, or had she just been rescued? Either answer felt dangerous. After what felt like hours, they stopped in a clearing where others waited. Lakota, warriors, women, even a few children all gathered around a low fire. Eyes turned to her, some curious, others guarded. No one spoke. The man who had taken her? No, the one who had freed her, stepped forward and exchanged words in a language she didn't understand. They listened, then nodded. He turned to her again. "You are safe here tonight. What's your name?" she asked, her voice cracking for the first time since the marriage. He hesitated, then spoke. "Wicasa," she repeated it quietly. It felt like stone in her mouth. "Solid, real." "Clara," she replied. He nodded again. "Sleep. We ride tomorrow." "Where?" she asked. He paused, then said, "Away from men who sell daughters." She didn't argue. She didn't ask more. She was too tired, too raw, too unsure of how to carry the weight of freedom when it came so suddenly. That night, she lay beneath a blanket of stars and felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not joy, not relief, but the smallest flicker of something she hadn't dared name since the day her father betrayed her. Hope. By morning, the wind had shifted. It no longer howled like it had the day she was sold. It whispered, carrying the smell of pine and river water through the valley. Clara rose before the others, her eyes gritty from little sleep, but her body alert in a way it hadn't been in days. The Lakota camp moved like breath, silent, steady, each person with a purpose. No orders were barked, no fear darkened their faces. They simply moved together. Wicasa handed her a wrapped bundle without a word. Inside was flatbread, dried meat, and a water skin. Clara took it with a nod, unsure how to thank him without sounding like a child. "We ride east," he said. "Safer ground." She didn't ask why he was helping her. She wasn't sure she could trust his kindness, or if it was kindness at all, but something about the way he spoke, not just the words, but the calm certainty in them, made her follow without protest. They rode for hours, the horses weaving through narrow paths and quiet ridges where eagles flew overhead, and the land stretched vast and untouched. Wicasa never looked back to see if she was keeping up. He knew she would. The other riders stayed ahead or behind, keeping distance. She was not part of them. Not yet, maybe never. But they didn't treat her like a prisoner. That afternoon, they stopped to rest beside a shallow stream. Clara knelt to wash her hands, the cold water stinging her raw skin. Wicasa crouched nearby, sharpening a blade on a flat stone. "You are stronger than you think," he said without looking at her. The words struck her harder than the stream's cold. "You don't even know me," she replied. "I know how you walked away," he said. "I saw what you carried in your eyes." She stared at him, unsure if she wanted to cry or scream. Instead, she asked, "Why didn't you just leave me?" He finally met her gaze. "Because the fire in you matched the one in me." That night, as they camped beneath the trees, Clara wrapped herself in a blanket, not just for warmth, but to hold herself together. She didn't know what she was becoming, only that she no longer felt like the girl who had been handed off like coin. Something inside her was changing, burning hotter than fear, and it had everything to do with the man who spoke like wind and saw through silence. The next morning, the sky hung low with gray, but it didn't rain. The clouds moved fast like they were chasing something across the open land. Clara rode in silence, her legs aching from the rhythm of the saddle, her mind spinning with questions she hadn't dared speak aloud. Each mile behind them stretched the distance between who she had been and who she was becoming. Wicasa rode ahead, occasionally glancing back to check on her, never needing to speak to guide. He read the land like she once read books. Every curve of rock, every pause in the bird song told him something. To her it was a foreign language, but she wanted to understand it. That desire surprised her. Near midday they came upon a hill with a wide view of the plains below. Smoke rose in the distance, not thick like wildfire, but small, scattered. Wicasa stared at it for a long time before speaking. "A settler camp," he said. "Trappers, maybe soldiers." Clara felt her breath hitch. Settlers meant she could go back. Soldiers meant safety, and yet the thought filled her with unease. "You want to return?" he asked, reading her without turning. She hesitated. "I don't know," she said truthfully. "That life, it ended when I was sold," he nodded slowly. "Then don't go back to ashes. Go forward to something that breathes." They made camp early that day, sheltered near a grove where wild berries grew along the rocks. One of the older women from the group approached Clara and offered her a carved wooden comb. It was simple, worn but smooth in the hand. Clara ran it through her hair, the first time she'd done so in weeks, and it brought tears to her eyes, not because of pain, but because of memory. The woman said something in Lakota, then placed a hand on Clara's shoulder and smiled. Clara didn't understand the words, but she understood the gesture. She wasn't invisible here. That night, Wicasa sat beside the fire, carving a symbol into a small strip of leather. He handed it to her wordlessly. It was her name, Clara, carved in both English and Lakota symbols. She held it like it was something sacred, because it was, not just a name, a reminder that she still existed. And now someone saw her. They moved again at sunrise, crossing a dry creek bed, where sun-bleached bones peeked from the dust like warnings too old to be heard. Clara no longer asked where they were going. The rhythm of travel had become her new skin. Wake, ride, listen, rest. But today felt different. There was no urgency in their pace, no glance over the shoulder. It was the first day that didn't feel like running. Wicasa led them to a flat valley between two hills where a dozen Lakota lodges stood, their buffalo hide walls flapping gently in the breeze. Children ran barefoot through the tall grass. Women stirred pots and repaired clothing. Dogs barked lazily. It looked nothing like the stories settlers whispered. No savagery, no violence, just life. Wicasa dismounted and looked back at her. "This is my home," he said. "You can stay if you choose." Clara's breath caught. A part of her had expected this to end, that she would be dropped at some fort, left to explain how she had survived. But here he was, offering her a choice. It struck her like lightning. He wasn't keeping her. He was freeing her. Inside the camp, people watched but didn't stare. A young girl brought her water without being asked. A woman handed her a woven shawl as if she already belonged. Clara stood in the center of it all, stunned by the weight of something she'd never known she needed. Acceptance. That evening, Wicasa handed her a bowl of soup, thick with roots and wild herbs. She took a bite, expecting bitterness, but it was warm, rich, alive. It filled the cracks inside her she hadn't known were still open. She looked up at him. "Thank you," she said softly. He shook his head. "You walked your way here. I just cleared the path." Later, as the sky turned purple and fires flickered like stars on earth, she sat outside the lodge given to her, the leather band he had carved still clutched in her hand. For the first time since she had been sold to a man like livestock, Clara didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was living. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight, she finally understood what freedom tasted like. Warm broth, quiet laughter, and the sound of her name spoken without fear. Peace never lasts long on stolen land. Clara had begun to settle into the rhythm of the Lakota village, learning to gather roots, tend fires, even laugh again. But the world beyond the valley had not forgotten her, nor had Jeb Caro. One morning, as the mist still clung to the hills, a rider appeared at the edge of the village. Wicasa met him alone, their voices low and urgent. Clara stood nearby, heart thudding as she watched Wicasa's jaw tighten. When the rider left, Wicasa turned to her, his expression dark. "Jeb's alive. He's looking for you. He's not far." Clara didn't speak. She felt the ground shift beneath her. The fragile peace she had begun to trust cracking like thin ice. "He's with soldiers," he added. "Men who owe him favors. They'll call it rescue, but they're bringing chains, not freedom." A knot formed in her throat. "What do we do?" she asked. "We move," he said, "at dusk." But dusk came too late. The first shots rang out just past midday. Clara was gathering firewood near the stream when the sound tore through the air. Shouts followed, foreign voices crashing through the trees. She dropped the bundle and ran, heart pounding like hooves. Smoke began to rise. Wicasa met her halfway, eyes sharp. "Back to the lodge." "Stay low. I can fight," she said, surprising even herself. He paused just long enough to see that she meant it. "Then stay with me," he said. The battle was quick and brutal. The Lakota moved like water, shifting through trees and brush, outnumbered but not outmatched. Clara stayed behind Wicasa, ducking behind logs, fetching arrows, gripping a blade she prayed she wouldn't need. But she did. A man in a blue coat lunged for her from behind a tree, rifle raised. Without thinking, Clara drove the knife into his side. He collapsed. Her hands shook. Her stomach turned, but she did not run. When the smoke cleared, Jeb was gone. Fled with the rest of the invaders, his threat unresolved, but retreating. The village was scarred, but still standing. That night, Clara washed the blood from her hands in the cold stream, her reflection wobbly and strange. She didn't recognize the girl staring back, and for the first time, she didn't want to. The wind that night didn't sing. It moaned, dragging ash and embers across the edges of the wounded village. Clara sat outside her lodge, her arms wrapped tight around her knees, her skin still damp from the stream, the scent of blood and smoke clinging to her hair. Around her the Lakota moved with practiced sorrow, tending to the wounded, mourning their dead with quiet grace. No wailing, no spectacle, just reverence. She had killed a man. The thought curled deep inside her chest like something sharp and coiled. Wicasa sat down beside her without a word, staring into the small fire that crackled between them. "You did what you had to," he said, as if reading the weight on her shoulders. "Doesn't make it easier," she replied. He nodded once. "It's not supposed to." She looked at him then, truly looked not just as the man who had pulled her from slavery, not just as a warrior, but as someone scarred and still standing. "I never asked you why," she said. "Why you helped me?" He didn't speak right away. Then finally, "Because I've watched this land take too many women, seen too many of our own, stolen, sold, silenced. You didn't cry, you burned. I recognized the fire." Her throat tightened. "And now?" He turned to her. "Now you choose." The silence between them filled with a truth too heavy for words. She could leave, find the nearest fort, trade safety for silence, return to a world that wouldn't understand her anymore. Or she could stay, not as a rescued girl, but as something else entirely. What would they say, the settlers? "If I stayed," she asked, "they'd say you disappeared, became savage. And your people? They'll watch what you do, not what you say." The fire popped, sending a spark into the dark. Clara watched it drift, then vanish. "Then let them watch," she said. The words felt like stepping off a cliff, but not into nothing, into something new, something chosen. She didn't know what kind of woman she would become here among people whose language she barely understood in a place where survival was an everyday art. But she knew she wasn't going back. Not to the past, not to fear. The world had tried to shape her. Now she would shape herself. The sky cracked open with thunder 2 days later, the rain falling in heavy sheets as if the earth itself wanted to wash everything clean. Clara stood beneath a canvas overhang helping 2 women grind corn into flour. Her sleeves were rolled, her hands steady, her movements sure. She had stopped thinking of herself as a guest. But peace is never permanent when ghosts ride in daylight. Wicasa returned before sunset, his coat soaked and voice grim. "Jeb is back. He has more men, white ones, and they're not pretending to be soldiers this time." The name hit her like a rock to the chest. Jeb hadn't given up. He couldn't accept that something he thought he owned had slipped through his fingers. "They want you," Wicasa said, not with anger, but with certainty. "They say you were taken, that you belong to them." Clara didn't flinch. "I don't belong to anyone." "I know that," he said. "But they don't." That night the village prepared, not with fear, but with focus. Bows were strung, spears sharpened, young boys were sent to hide in the caves beyond the ridge. The elders prayed, the warriors planned, and Clara stood beside Wicasa, blade strapped to her hip, her heart pounding not with fear, but with fury. They came at dawn. Jeb rode at the front, his face twisted with self-righteous rage, flanked by mercenaries with guns and torches. "I'm taking her back," he shouted, voice booming across the field. "She's my wife." "She's stolen property." Clara stepped forward before anyone could stop her. "I'm not your anything," she said. Her voice didn't shake. Not once. Jeb laughed cruel and wild. "You think these savages will protect you forever?" Wicasa moved to stand beside her. "No," Clara said, stepping ahead. "I'll protect myself." What followed was chaos. Bullets tearing through trees, arrows slicing the wind. Clara didn't hide. She moved with purpose, dragging wounded to safety, throwing smoke to shield the archers. It wasn't bravery. It was clarity. She had run from this man once. She would not do it again. When the dust settled, the mercenaries fled. Jeb was found by the stream, broken and bleeding, his eyes full of disbelief. Clara stood over him, blade in hand, then turned away. He was nothing now, just a past she no longer carried. The battle had ended, but the echoes of it still lingered in the trees, in the smoke that clung to the air, and in Clara's bones. The village worked in quiet harmony, mending broken lodges, tending wounds, gathering what the storm had scattered. No one celebrated. Survival was never loud here. It was sacred. Clara moved among them with calloused hands and steady eyes. Children no longer stared. They ran to her. The women nodded in greeting. Even the elders stopped treating her like a question. She was no longer the outsider rescued by a Lakota warrior. She was one of them because she had chosen to be. Wicasa watched her from the edge of the village, leaning against a post, his arms crossed. He hadn't said much since the fight. He hadn't needed to. She approached him slowly, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "I didn't kill him," she said, her voice low. "I could have." Wicasa looked at her. "You didn't need to. You already won." She nodded, unsure if the tightness in her chest was grief or something else. "I don't know who I am anymore," she admitted. "That's the gift," he said. "Now you get to decide." She thought about that all day. As the sun began to fall, she walked to the river, her feet tracing the same path she had once taken in fear. Now she walked in stillness. At the bank, she took off her boots, stepped into the water, and let the current wash over her feet. It was cold, but it didn't steal her breath this time. It awakened something. Her past name, Clara Lorn, had belonged to a girl who'd been traded like a coin. A girl who'd been taught that survival meant silence. That girl had died the day Jeb lost her. The woman standing in the river had no master, no chains, no fear. That night, when she returned to the fire, she sat beside Wicasa and spoke only one sentence. "My name is Makawin, Earthwoman," he nodded. No ceremony, no questions, just truth. From that night on, no one called her Clara again. And when the wind moved through the village, it carried her new name with reverence. Not as a title given by a man, but as a name carved by her own hand, born of flame, blood, and choice. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell